The California Gold Rush was a rapid influx of fortune seekers in California that began after January 24, 1848, when gold was found by James W. Marshall at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California. At the time of the gold discovery, California was still a province of Mexico, sparsely populated with only about 14,000 non-indigenous people. The news of gold brought approximately 300,000 people to California from the rest of the United States and abroad in less than 7 years. The sudden population increase allowed California to become a state rapidly in the Compromise of 1850, while the sudden influx of gold into the money supply reinvigorated the American economy. Gold was first discovered in California for the first time in March 1842 at Rancho San Francisco, in the mountains north of present-day Los Angeles. Californian native Francisco Lopez was searching for stray horses and stopped on the bank of a small creek about 56 kilometers northwest of Los Angeles. While the horses grazed, Lopez dug up some wild onions and found a small gold nugget in the roots among the bulbs. He looked further and found more gold. Lopez took the gold to authorities, who confirmed its worth. Other finds were made, but many miners managed to keep the location secret, and the gold rush was avoided for a few years. In January 1847, 9 months into the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed, ending the fighting in California between Mexicans and Americans. The Mexican-American War ended on February 2, 1848, with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which formally transferred California to the United States. On January 24, 1848, James W. Marshall found shiny metal in the tail race of a lumber mill he was building for Sacramento pioneer John Sutter, known as Sutter's Mill near Coloma and the American River. Marshall brought what he found to Sutter, and the two privately tested the metal. After the tests showed that it was gold, they decided to keep the news quiet, because a gold rush would have destroyed the agriculture empire they had planned to create in California. In February 1848, they sent Charles Bennett to Monterey to meet with Colonel Mason, the chief US official in California, to secure the mineral rights of the land where the mill stood. But Bennett couldn't keep the secret, and by March 1848, rumors of the discovery were confirmed by San Francisco newspaper publisher and merchant Samuel Brennan. Brennan hurriedly set up a store to sell gold prospecting supplies. Then he walked through the streets of San Francisco announcing the discovery. On August 19, 1848, the New York Herald was the first major newspaper on the East Coast to report the discovery of gold. On December 5, 1848, US President James Polk confirmed the discovery of gold in an address to Congress. As a result, individuals seeking to benefit from the gold rush, later called the 49ers, began moving to California. As Sutter had feared, his business plans were ruined after his workers left in search of gold, and squatters took over his land and stole his crops and cattle. The first people to rush to the gold fields, beginning in the spring of 1848, were the residents of California themselves, primarily agriculturally oriented Americans and Europeans living in Northern California, along with native Californians and some Spanish-speaking Californians. Word of the gold rush spread slowly at first. The earliest gold seekers were people who lived near California, or people who heard the news from ships on the fastest sailing routes from California. The first large group of Americans to arrive were several thousand Oregonians. Next came people from the Hawaii and several thousand Latin Americans, including people from Mexico, from Peru, and from far as away as Chile, both by ship and overland. By the end of 1848, some 6,000 new people had come to California, although only a small number, probably less than 500, traveled overland from the United States that year. Some of these 48ers, as the earliest gold seekers were sometimes called, were able to collect large amounts of easily accessible gold, in some cases thousands of dollars worth each day. Even ordinary prospectors averaged daily gold finds worth of 10 to 15 times the daily wage of a laborer on the East Coast. A person could work for 6 months in the gold fields and find the equivalent of 6 years' wages back home. Some hope to get rich quick and return home, and others wish to start businesses in California. Because the gold in the California gravel beds was so richly concentrated, early 49ers were able to retrieve loose gold flakes and nuggets with their hands, or simply pan for gold in rivers and streams. By the beginning of 1849, word of the gold rush had spread around the world, and an overwhelming number of gold seekers and merchants began to arrive from virtually every continent. It is estimated that approximately 90,000 people arrived in California in 1849, about half by land and half by sea. The largest group of 49ers in 1849 were Americans, arriving by the tens of thousands overland across the continent and along various sailing routes. About half came overland on the California Trail and the Gila River Trail. Other half came by sea, facing substantial hardships on the trip. From the East Coast, a sailing voyage around the tip of South America will take 4 to 5 months and cover approximately 33,000 kilometers. An alternative was to sail to the Atlantic side of the Isthmus of Panama, take canoes and mules for a week through the jungle, and then on the Pacific side, wait for a ship sailing for San Francisco. There was also a route across Mexico, starting at Veracruz. The companies providing such transportation created vast wealth among their owners. In the early years of the rush, much of the population growth in the San Francisco area was due to steamship travel from New York City. San Francisco had been a tiny settlement before the rush began. When the residents learned about the discovery, it at first became a ghost town of abandoned ships and businesses, but then boomed as merchants and new people arrived. The population of San Francisco increased quickly from about 200 in 1848 to 25,000 full-time residents by 1850 and 150,000 in 1870. Supply ships arrived in San Francisco with goods to supply the needs of the growing population. When hundreds of ships were abandoned after their crews deserted to go into the gold fields, many ships were converted to warehouses, stores, taverns, hotels, and one into a jail. As the city expanded and new places were needed on which to build, many ships were destroyed and used as landfill. By 1855, it is estimated that at least 300,000 gold seekers, merchants, and other immigrants had arrived in California from around the world. The largest group continued to be Americans, but there were tens of thousands each of Mexicans, Chinese, Britons, Australians, French, and Latin Americans, together with many smaller groups of miners. There were also women in the gold rush. However, their numbers were small. Of the 40,000 people who arrived by ship to the San Francisco Bay in 1849, only 700 were women, including those who were poor, wealthy, entrepreneurs, prostitutes, single and married. In California, women became widows quite frequently due to mining accidents, disease, or mining disputes of their husbands. When the gold rush began, the California goldfields were lawless places. After the end of the Mexican-American War, California became a possession of the United States, but it was not a formal territory and did not become a state until September 9, 1850. California existed in the unusual condition of a region under military control. Local residents operated under a confusing and changing mixture of Mexican rules, American principles, and personal dictates. The benefit to the 49ers was that the gold was simply free for the taking at first. In the gold fields at the beginning, there was no private property, no licensing fees, and no taxes. The rules attempted to balance the rights of early arrivals at the site with later arrivals. A claim could be staked by a prospector, but that claim was valid only as long as it was being actively worked. Miners worked at a claim only long enough to determine its potential. If a claim was deemed as low value, as most were, miners would abandon the site in search of a better one. In the case where a claim was abandoned or not worked upon, other miners would claim jump the land. Claim jumping meant that a miner began work on a previously claimed site. Disputes were often handled personally and violently, and were sometimes addressed by groups of prospectors acting as arbitrators. Recent scholarship confirms that merchants made far more money than miners during the gold rush. The wealthiest man in California during the early years of the rush was Samuel Brannan, a tireless self-promoter, shopkeeper, and newspaper publisher. Brannan opened the first supply stores in Sacramento, Coloma, and other spots in the gold fields. Just as the rush began, he purchased all the prospecting supplies available in San Francisco and resold them at a substantial profit. By 1850, most of the easily accessible gold has been collected, and attention turned to extracting gold from more difficult locations. Faced with gold increasingly difficult to retrieve, Americans began to drive out foreigners to get at the most accessible gold that remained. The new California state legislature passed a foreign miners tax of $20 per month, $650 per month as of 2022, and American prospectors began organized attacks on foreign miners, particularly Latin Americans and Chinese. In addition, the huge numbers of newcomers were driving Native Americans out of their traditional hunting, fishing, and food-gathering areas. To protect their homes and livelihood, some Native Americans responded by attacking the miners. This provoked counterattacks on native villages. The Native Americans, outgunned, were often slaughtered. It is estimated that up to 16,000 California Indians were killed by non-Indians, mostly occurring in more than 360 massacres between 1846 and 1873. By 1890, the indigenous population of California fell below 20,000, primarily because of the killings. About 370 tons of gold were removed in the first 5 years of the gold rush. By 1853, hydraulic mining was used on ancient gold-bearing gravel beds on hillsides and bluffs in the goldfields. In a modern style of hydraulic mining, first developed in California and later used around the world, a high-pressure hose directed a powerful stream or jet of water at gold-bearing gravel beds. The loosened gravel and gold would then pass over sluices, with the gold settling to the bottom where it was collected. By 1855, the economic climate had changed dramatically. Gold could be retrieved profitably from the goldfields only by medium to large groups of workers, either in partnerships or as employees. At the mid-1850s, it was the owners of these gold mining companies who made the money. Also, the population and economy of California had become large and diverse enough that money could be made in a wide variety of conventional businesses. After the gold rush had concluded, gold recovery operations continued. The final stage to recover loose gold was to prospect for gold that had slowly washed down into the flat river bottoms and sandbars of California's Central Valley and other gold-bearing areas of California. Both during the gold rush and in the decades that followed, gold seekers also engaged in hard rock mining, extracting the gold directly from the rock that contained it. Eventually, hard rock mining became the single largest source of gold produced in the gold country. The total production of gold in California from then until now is estimated at 3,700 tons. Within a few years after the end of the gold rush, in 1863, the groundbreaking ceremony for the western leg of the first transcontinental railroad was held in Sacramento. The line's completion some 6 years later, financed in part with gold rush money, united California with the central and eastern United States. Travel that had taken weeks or even months could now be accomplished in days. Also, the Panama Railway, spanning the Isthmus of Panama, was finished in 1855. Steamships began regular service from San Francisco to Panama, where passengers, goods, and mail will take the train across the isthmus and board steamships headed to the east coast. California's name became connected with the gold rush, and fast success in a new world became known as the California Dream. California was perceived as a place of new beginnings, where great wealth could reward hard work and good luck. After the gold rush, generations of immigrants have been attracted by the California Dream, including farmers, oil drillers, movie makers, airplane builders, entrepreneurs in computer industry, each having their boom times.